Hello, and thank you for taking the time to view the video of my Canadian Game Studies Annual Conference 2021 presentation entitled Who Am I Anyway? Considering Positionality Within Video Game Research as a Biracial Indigenous Scholar. My name is Ryan Scheiding, and I am due to to receive my PhD from Concordia University in June of this year. Before I get into today's talk, I do want to just discuss a recording. I'm recording from home and have a little bit of a lack of access to certain equipment, so I will not be appearing on screen today, and I do apologize for any issues with the audio quality. In lieu of seeing myself, I don't have the lighting or the camera for that. I am using some game footage from games that appeared within my recently completed dissertation. The game footage is from Fallout 4 and Yakuza 6. As another note with this paper, just before we get into it, originally I intended this to be a paper that was exploratory. I was originally accepted in last year's conference, and this was an exploratory paper about what I was planning on doing with my positionality for my dissertation research, or how I was going to write that up within my dissertation, I should say. But now today's presentation is more about what it is that I did within my completed dissertation. So just to start, my dissertation was on the collective/cultural memory of the atomic bombs as expressed through video games. So for this, I created a theoretical model that I called Discourses of the Past, and I did historiographical research as well as more traditional analysis of video games. So my historiographical research established what the cultural and collective memory of the atomic bombs were, both in America/the West and within Japan. And then I did several case studies, 3 Japanese video games and 3 American video games that all depicted atomic or nuclear warfare in some way. And I compared and analyzed those to the established collective/cultural memory, so to see what that would tell us about how atomic imagery and nuclear weapons are depicted and used within video games, and what that tells us. As I said, this study included both American/Western and Japanese historiography in video games, and as a result, I knew from very early on within my research that positionality was going to be an essential part of the project and was going to be very important to both my ability to complete the project, but also to conduct responsible research. So this video essay today is going to be broken down into 2 parts. There's going to be the who I am from an autobiographical and demographic context, and then how I navigate this and understand my position and positionality within my research. So to start out with me, I am a Canadian of mixed race. I am half Aboriginal, it's Algonquin and Mohawk, and half European in descent, English, Scottish, Irish, German, and Dutch, potentially others in there as well. And I self-describe myself as a biracial native or biracial indigenous, but it is important to note that I am not, I would not be clarified as an quote Indian under the Indian Act by the Canadian government. I am the first generation of my family that would not be. And I am also what is generally considered to be white passing, though I do find that to be a problematic term, especially when we are talking about indigeneity within Canada and the relationship between the race and the Canadian government. Another biographical point about myself is that I have lived my entire life in Southern Ontario and Quebec. So I have not lived in Japan, I have not lived in the United States. I have been to both places for extended periods of time. But in studying American and Japanese video games, I am not from the United States or Japan. Another important part of my research is acknowledging that I do all of my research in English. I have very limited French language skills, and I have taken some Japanese language classes, but I am not an advanced student in any way, so my research is done through translated texts. Which is an issue when working with the Japanese side, particularly Japanese historiography. Due to this positionality that I've just outlined, I do recognize that there are several potential blind spots within my scholarship that needed to be treated with care, particularly in trying to do a large dissertation project such as my own. So the first is that though I am a racialized person, I did need to acknowledge that I am still a Westerner studying an East Asian nation. In Japan, at least for half of the project. Of course, this can lead to simple accusations of Orientalism, as outlined by Edward Said. And it is important to note that Orientalism in a Japanese context is very different from what Said notes. What Said writes about the works of Nishihara and Tanaka, who are going to be in my within the references on this video at the end. Expand on that a little more. But regardless of this, I do need to recognize that there is a very easy potential pitfall of falling into Orientalism, falling into this this academic tradition of Westerners looking at the East as another, and creating and fetishizing the East. And the second, of course, I outlined a little bit already, but is important to say, is my language of study. The fact that it's not that I am working in only English is very important when analyzing other cultures, of course. So this is an issue when studying Japanese texts, or is trying to study Japan as a whole, as a nation, as a people, as a culture. And also extends, of course, into some of the other aspects of my work. I only work in English, so I work in translation of Japanese, German, Italian, French, any number of different works. But it is an important, if often overlooked, aspect of scholarship that becomes much more evident when you are studying, a nation or a people or a culture like Japan with a much different language. So, when considered together, it is quite evident that my race, citizenship, and language skills qualify me as an outsider of the United States, but certainly of Japan as well. And as a result, I knew that this was needed to be acknowledged, and I wanted to be at least a part of my my written dissertation, and to be explicitly outlined, and hopefully something that could be useful for others moving forward. So I position myself within my research through post-colonial theory, and of course this includes foundational works such as the aforementioned Edward Said, but also Chakravarti Spivak with her Does the Subaltern Speak is a very important text as well. But today I'm going to focus just on two works and two concepts that have been very central to my understanding my positionality and positioning my work responsibly. And that would be, the two authors are Trin-Min Ha and Ing Ang, and I'm particularly interested in their ideas of speaking nearby and the way that Ang defines hybridity. So Trin-Min Ha defines speaking nearby as, quote, a speaking that does not objectify, does not point to an object as if it is distant from the speaking subject or absent from the speaking place, a speaking that reflects on itself and can come very close to a subject without, however, seizing or claiming it, a speaking in brief, whose closures are only moments of transition opening up for other possible moments of transitions. In other words, end quote, I should say, in other words, speaking nearby acknowledges the subject position of the researcher, in this case myself, as an outsider without fully separating the researcher from their research object or making claims of objectivity. Speaking nearby does not attempt to create knowledge that speaks for or speaks directly to a research object, and instead speaking nearby entails accepting one's position as an outsider and respecting and treating with care the research subject before using this research as, to quote Trin-Min Ha again, as a point of departure for cultural reflection. So within my own case here, it's myself acknowledging that I am an outsider of Japanese culture, and also to an extent American culture, but not trying to rely on terminology such as objectivity, or not making the decision that as an outsider I don't have anything to say or any ability to do any analytical work of another culture. So in my case, this is, as we're discussing today, looking at Japanese video games. I want to study Japanese video games and talk about their cultural impacts, and that is what I did within my dissertation, but I didn't want to position myself as if I knew, as if I was just being completely objective, or as if what I knew was sacrosanct, or that what I knew would speak for how Japanese people interpret these games, or even the Japanese people who are making the games, what they meant to say. I acknowledge that I am around the subject, but that I'm not the only source of knowledge on the subject, and that, but also not positioning myself so far away where I believe that I can't say anything about this. So an important part of this, in this positioning, this speaking nearby, are the ideas of hybridity. So Ing Ang writes about this in her work, not speaking Chinese, and she says of hybridity, by recognizing the inescapable impurity of all cultures and the porousness of all cultural boundaries in an irrecoverably globalized, interconnected, and interdependent world, we may be able to conceive of our living together in terms of complicated entanglement, not in terms of the apartheid of insurmountable differences. I like this definition of hybridity and trying to understand how we can place ourselves within the world, and to, on a much smaller scale, how we can position ourselves within our research. So by positioning myself to be speaking nearby while acknowledging the cultural hybridity of both myself as a biracial person and of our larger globalized society, I believe that this allows me to conduct responsible research and to create cross-cultural knowledge. I believe that speaking nearby and complicated entanglement help to both position my research and describe my upbringing in Canada as a biracial Indigenous person playing American and Japanese video games. So to conclude today, I do want to say that this video essay has not been designed as an all-encompassing blueprint on game studies methodology and positionality. Each and every one person, regardless of whether they believe themselves to be an insider or an outsider, or regardless of what they are studying, should consider their positionality. But that's going to be very unique for each one of us. It's not going to be the same. Everybody's going to have very different potential issues, and it's important to take that step back at the beginning of a research project, like a dissertation or any other, to make sure that you can do this responsible research and that you aren't just seeking an easy answer. Just saying, I am an insider, so I know all about this, is equally as problematic as being an outsider and saying, well, I'm an objective scholar. We need to acknowledge these potential issues and to try and work through them rather than avoiding them or seeking these easier answers. Now, as I said, don't want this to be an all-encompassing paper. I don't want this to be like I don't want to make it sound like I think that this should work only one way for each project. Myself, I do rely on post-colonial theory because I do believe that there's a great value in that, particularly as someone who's engaging in the study of Japanese games, and to a larger extent is within Asian studies and area studies and Japanese history. It's very important to consider more post-colonial ideas. So what I would call for from this paper would be the use of more post-colonialism in game studies, in particular following the works of Suvu Mukherjee, who has written extensively about that and will also be in my references for this paper. And also perhaps to have less reliance on on ideas of insider outsider, these more traditional ideas, and more of a stress on things like the hybridity and fluidity of ourselves, but also of the research, of cultures, and to try and create and to try and acknowledge these, so that as we are doing our research and creating these further knowledges, that we are not relying on the easy answers and that we're asking these difficult questions. So once again, I'd like to thank you all for watching my video. I do look forward to the opportunity to answer questions during the conference and to talk about this a little bit more. But if you don't have the opportunity, you can find me on Twitter at Ryan Scheiding. It's at the beginning of this video. Or I look forward to hearing from you at the conference. So as this video closes, the references are going to pop up onto the screen from today's paper, I would also like to acknowledge that as this is part of the completion of my dissertation, that this presentation and what I'm talking about today was partially funded by the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada through a postdoctoral or through a doctoral fellowship. So once again, thank you so much for taking the time to view this video today. And I look forward to hearing more about this or talking more about this in the future. Thank you.